I still remember the day everything changed. Not the day they called me a failure, but the day they realised what I'd become. It started with my brother Ethan's voice, shaking with disbelief through the phone. "Dad, you need to see this," he said, staring out of his car window, mouth slightly open. Hey everyone. Before I tell you this unbelievable story, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this one. All right, let's begin. He had been driving through the countryside with his wife when something caught his eye. A wide stretch of green hills, fenced with black steel. A private driveway lined with white cherry blossoms. And, at the top, a mansion that looked like something out of a magazine. The glass walls sparkled under the sunlight. The gate was massive, silent and elegant, with only a small plaque at the centre that read, A. Parker Technologies Headquarters. My name. Ethan's hands trembled as he zoomed in with his phone camera. He could see workers in uniforms tending to the lawn, a security vehicle patrolling slowly, and 3 luxury cars parked near the main building. He thought it was some billionaire's estate, until he caught a glimpse of me stepping out from one of the cars. "Dad," he repeated, louder this time. "It's Amelia. You won't believe this. It's her place." 2 years earlier, I was the forgotten child, the quiet one, the so-called failure. At that time, I didn't own any mansion. I didn't even own a decent car. What I did have was a heart full of disappointment and a mind tired of trying to prove my worth to people who had already made up their minds. My parents had given Ethan $250,000 for his wedding, an event that looked like it was planned by royalty. My father stood up that night, toasting with pride, and said, "That's my boy, the success of this family." Then he looked at me. "Maybe someday, Amelia, you'll figure it out too." Everyone laughed politely, pretending it was just a joke. But I felt it. The sting, the humiliation, the quiet reminder that, in their eyes, I was nothing more than the child who didn't fit their idea of success. I didn't cry in front of them. I smiled, I clapped. I even helped my mother clean up after the party like a good daughter should. But that night I sat in my car alone and something inside me broke. I realised then that no amount of sacrifice would ever change how they saw me. I had spent years helping Ethan through college, covering for his mistakes, even lending him my savings when he got into debt, and yet I was the one branded as the family's disappointment. So I stopped calling. I disappeared. Not out of anger, but because I finally understood that silence was sometimes the loudest answer. Now, standing on the balcony of my estate, looking down at the world I built with my own hands, I could see Ethan's car parked by the gate. Even from that distance, I recognised the way he gestured, pointing toward the mansion as if explaining to our father that what he was seeing was impossible. I could almost imagine my father's voice on the other end of the call, sharp, proud, and shaking for the first time in his life. "Are you sure?" he'd say. And Ethan nearly shouting, "Dad, it's her. Amelia owns this place." For 2 years they hadn't heard a word from me. And now, the daughter they once called a failure had built something worth over $15 million. I smiled softly, not out of pride, but peace. The kind that comes when the world finally catches up to what you already knew about yourself. Little did they know, that call was only the beginning. They always said families were built on love, but in ours, it was built on comparison. Growing up, I learned early that Ethan was the son, and the rest of us revolved around him. He wasn't a bad person, just used to the kind of attention that never faded, no matter what he did. If he failed a test, Dad would say, "It's okay, son, you'll do better next time." If I failed one, it was, "Amelia, what's wrong with you? You're supposed to be smarter than this." It became a pattern. Ethan's smallest efforts were celebrations. My biggest achievements were expected. When Ethan wanted a new laptop, Dad bought it the next day. When I asked for one to finish my school project, I was told, "You can share his." I didn't hate my brother. I envied how easily he could make them proud. Still, I loved my family, so much that I never complained. I stayed up late tutoring Ethan when he was failing algebra, wrote his college essays when he panicked before deadlines, even paid his credit card debt once with the little money I'd saved from my part-time job. He promised to pay me back. He never did. And I didn't remind him, because that's what family does. Or at least, that's what I believed. Years later, Ethan got a stable job at a marketing firm. He called home with the news, and you'd think he'd won the lottery. Mum cried. Dad opened a bottle of champagne. When I told them about the small software contract I'd landed with a local business, Dad only said, "That's nice, Amelia, but when are you going to get a real job?" I laughed it off, pretending it didn't hurt, but it did, every time. Then came the night that would change everything, Ethan's engagement dinner. We were sitting around a long table at a fancy restaurant, all smiles and clinking glasses. Ethan stood to make a toast, his fiancée glowing beside him. My parents looked like they could burst with pride. Then Dad cleared his throat. "Your mother and I have a little surprise," he said, his face lighting up. He pulled out an envelope and handed it to Ethan. "Consider this our wedding gift. $250,000. You deserve it, son." The table gasped. Ethan froze. His fiancée covered her mouth, tears in her eyes. Everyone clapped. Everyone but me. I sat there, heart pounding, my hands under the table to hide how they shook. Then, in front of everyone, Dad turned to me and said, "Maybe when you finally do something successful, we'll do the same for you." Laughter followed. Polite, nervous laughter. I forced a smile, even though my throat burned. It wasn't the money that broke me. It was the message behind it. That my worth had a price tag, and it was still zero. After dinner, I helped Mum clean up while everyone else danced. She didn't notice my red eyes or trembling hands. She just kept humming, cheerful and proud of the night. When we drove home, Ethan leaned over and said, "Hey sis, don't take it personally. You know Dad doesn't mean it." I nodded, but I knew he did. That night, I lay awake replaying everything. My sacrifices, my silence, the way I always tried to make them proud. I realised that nothing I ever did would be enough. Not unless I became something they couldn't ignore. That was the moment a quiet fire started burning inside me. I didn't know how or when, but I promised myself, they'll see me someday, and when they do, they won't laugh. The wedding was supposed to be a celebration of love. For me, it became the final straw. I arrived early that day wearing a soft blue dress I'd bought on sale. It wasn't designer like the others, but it made me feel calm, like the ocean before a storm. Ethan's wedding was a grand affair, held at a luxury vineyard outside the city. The whole place smelled like roses and money. Everywhere I looked, people smiled, laughed, and congratulated my brother. I wanted to be happy for him. Truly, I did. But a small voice in my heart kept whispering, "You'll never be one of them." Mum was radiant in a silver gown, and Dad looked like a proud king walking around shaking hands with guests. "My son's getting married," he kept saying. "He's doing great things." I stood at the edge of the crowd, invisible as always. When I finally approached to greet them, Dad gave me a polite nod and said, "Glad you could make it, Amelia. Try not to look too serious. This is a joyful day. I smiled tightly. I am joyful, Dad. He chuckled. Good. Maybe next time we'll be celebrating your success too. It was like a knife hidden behind a compliment, sharp and meant to sting. During dinner, I sat near the end of the long table, far from my parents. Guests whispered about the lavish decorations and the live band that cost as much as a new car. I kept my head down, quietly eating. Then came the moment that burned itself into my memory. The DJ called Ethan and his new wife to the dance floor. My father stood with his champagne glass, ready to make a toast. I couldn't be prouder of my son, he said, voice booming through the speakers. Ethan's success reminds us that hard work and vision always pay off. He's built a future worth celebrating. The crowd cheered. Then he laughed and added, as for Amelia, well, she's still finding her path. Maybe someday she'll surprise us. Laughter again. Softer this time. Pitying. I stared down at my plate, pretending to smile. My hands trembled, my throat felt tight. I swallowed hard, forcing my tears back. When the song started, everyone got up to dance. I slipped away quietly, walking out into the cool night air. The stars looked blurry through my tears. I stood by the vineyard fence, shoes sinking into the soft earth, trying to breathe. My heart hurt. Not because of what was said, but because of what it confirmed. I could give my best, and it would never be enough. Not for them, not for him. My phone buzzed. It was Lydia. Hey, she said when I answered, her voice soft. How's the wedding? I laughed bitterly. You don't want to know. There was a pause. Amelia, she said gently, you've done enough. Stop bleeding for people who don't see your worth. Maybe it's time you start living for you. Her words hit me harder than my father's insults ever did. For years, I had tried to earn their love by helping Ethan, by staying quiet, by accepting the scraps of attention they offered. But all it ever brought me was pain. That night, I made a decision. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't make a scene. I just left. I hugged Ethan goodbye, told Mum I was tired, and drove off before the fireworks began. The road back to the city was long and dark. But for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt free. I didn't call the next morning. I didn't visit for Christmas. When Mum texted weeks later, "Why are you so distant lately?" I simply replied, "I just need space." What I didn't say was that I needed to find myself again, away from the noise, away from their voices, away from the endless cycle of proving and failing. That night in the vineyard was the breaking point, but it was also the beginning of something new, something powerful. When you cut ties with family, the quiet that follows doesn't feel peaceful at first. It feels hollow, like walking through an empty house that still smells of the people who left. After Ethan's wedding, I packed up my things from my small apartment near my parents' home and moved to a distant city. No forwarding address, no phone calls, just silence. It wasn't revenge. I just couldn't breathe there anymore. I found a tiny apartment above a laundromat. One room, a thin mattress, and a window that wouldn't shut properly. Every night I'd hear cars rushing below and think about how different life felt when you had no one expecting anything from you. For the first time, I wasn't the disappointment. I was just me. Days turned into weeks. I worked as a freelance web designer to pay rent and bought cheap noodles in bulk to survive. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every penny I earned came from my own effort. Still, there were nights I cried. Not because I missed their approval, but because a small part of me still wished things had been different. I missed Mum's laughter, the smell of her cooking, even Dad's old-fashioned lectures. But then I'd remember his voice saying, "You'll never amount to anything." And I'd wipe my tears and get back to work. The idea came to me one night while fixing a client's broken website. Small businesses were always struggling to handle deliveries, inventory, and logistics. They wasted money trying to do everything manually. What if there was a way to help them manage it all automatically? Something powered by artificial intelligence that adapted to their needs. I stayed up all night sketching ideas on scrap paper. The more I thought about it, the more alive I felt. It wasn't just a business plan. It was my way out. I called the concept Link Logic, a digital platform that could connect small businesses to drivers, suppliers, and warehouses through smart data tracking. I didn't have investors. I didn't have a team, just my old laptop and sheer determination. For months, I coded through the night and freelanced during the day. Lydia, my one loyal friend, called every week, checking in. She was the only person who knew how much I'd given up for my family. One night I told her, "I feel like I'm building something no one will ever see." She laughed softly. "Oh, they'll see it, Amelia. Trust me. You just keep building." Her faith in me was the light I needed. A few months later, I decided to take a huge risk. I spent nearly every dollar I had saved, all of it, to create a prototype and present it to a local startup competition. The day of the pitch, I stood on stage in my thrift store blazer, hands trembling. Around me were polished tech founders with perfect slides and million-dollar smiles. I was terrified, but when I spoke, something changed. I wasn't just another contestant. I was a woman who had been told she couldn't, standing there proving she could. I explained how Link Logic would save businesses time and money, especially for people like my mother's friends who ran small stores and delivery services. By the time I finished, the judges were leaning forward, whispering to each other. 2 days later, I got the call. They were offering me $400,000 in seed funding. I hung up the phone and sat frozen on my mattress, tears rolling down my cheeks. After years of silence, of feeling invisible, of being told I was a failure, someone finally saw value in what I could create. That night, I looked out the cracked window at the city lights and whispered, "This is only the beginning." And for the first time, I believed it. The day I signed my first funding deal, I didn't celebrate with champagne or parties. I bought a second-hand office chair. That's how real it felt. Fragile, small, and yet somehow enormous. With the $400,000 investment, I rented a tiny shared workspace downtown. It smelled like coffee and ambition. Everyone there building something. Everyone half broken, but still trying. I named the company A. Parker Technologies after myself. Not because I wanted to show off, but because I needed to see my name stand for something strong. For once, I wanted Amelia Parker to mean success. The first 6 months were chaos. The code crashed constantly. 2 of my early hires quit. The app that looked brilliant on paper refused to run on half the devices we tested. I barely slept. I lived off caffeine and determination. Sometimes I'd stare at the wall, wondering if Dad had been right all along. If I really was the family failure pretending to be something more. But every time that doubt crept in, I'd remember the vineyard, the laughter, and his words echoing. Maybe someday she'll surprise us. That memory became fuel. Lydia visited often, bringing food and optimism. "You look like you've been living inside a computer," she joked one evening, setting down takeout boxes. "I think I have," I said, laughing weakly. She smiled and squeezed my hand. "You're building something real, Amelia. Don't forget that." Her belief kept me going when everything else was falling apart. By month 7, we finally launched the first beta version of Link Logic. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Small local stores began signing up, curious about our service. For the first time, I saw users logging in, transactions happening, businesses saving money because of something I built. It was surreal, But success didn't come without more challenges. The investor who had backed me wanted faster results. "You need a bigger launch," he said during a tense meeting. "Get more users or we're pulling funding." I nodded, hiding my panic. If he pulled out, the company would die before it lived. So I did what I'd always done. I worked harder. Days blurred into nights. My small team of 4 and I pulled all-nighters, fixing bugs, designing marketing materials, emailing potential clients. I coded until my fingers ached. And when we finally secured a deal with a chain of grocery stores, the investor called me again. "I don't know how you did it," he said, sounding impressed, "but you've bought yourself time, and maybe a future." That night, I allowed myself one small luxury. I bought a simple bracelet, engraved with the words, "Keep building." A few weeks later, I stood outside my new office building, larger, brighter, and mine. A heavy feeling filled my chest. Not sadness, not even pride. It was gratitude. I thought about the version of me who used to cry alone in her car, feeling like she'd never be enough. If she could see this moment, she wouldn't believe it. Still, beneath the success, there was a quiet ache I couldn't shake. Whenever I saw families walking by, laughing and hugging, I thought of home, of Mum's cooking, of Ethan's careless smile, of Dad's silence. I wondered if they'd ever think of me, if they'd ever realise what I'd become. But I didn't reach out, not yet. I wasn't ready to face them, not as the broken girl they left behind, but as the woman who had rebuilt herself from nothing. That time would come soon enough, and when it did, they wouldn't recognise the person standing before them. 3 years after I wrote my first line of code for LinkLogic, the app was on every major business platform in the country. It happened so gradually that I didn't notice success arriving until one morning when I opened my email and saw a message from Forbes. "Congratulations, Ms. Parker. You've been shortlisted for our Top 30 Under 30 Innovators feature." I read it 3 times. My coffee went cold in my hand. 3 years ago, I was sleeping on a couch, surviving on vending machine snacks. Now I had employees, an office with glass walls, and a brand people trusted. The recognition came with a price, though. My calendar was packed with investor calls, product meetings, and interviews. The media wanted to know everything: my vision, my past, my motivation. I always smiled and said, I wanted to make small businesses stronger. But deep down, I knew it had started as something simpler. I wanted to prove to my father that I could. Lydia was the only one who ever saw through the polished version of me. During one of our late night meetings, she said quietly, "You've built everything you dreamed of, Amelia, but you still look tired." "I am," I admitted. "I just don't know what to do with the quiet anymore." She gave me a look that only a true friend could give, gentle but cutting through every layer of my defence. "Maybe it's time you face the noise you left behind." I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to hear my own name and their names in the same sentence yet. When the feature article came out, it went viral overnight. Suddenly, my inbox overflowed with congratulations from classmates, old colleagues, and strangers who said I inspired them. Then one email froze me. "Amelia, I saw your face on Forbes. I'm proud of you. Mum." It was short, no explanations, no apologies. But seeing her name after 6 silent years made something in me break open. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to. Weeks later, I was invited to speak at a tech summit. Standing on stage before 1,000 people, lights blinding my eyes, I began my talk. I started LinkLogic in a small shared workspace with 4 people and a dream no one believed in. I was told I wasn't practical, that I wasn't built for business. I learned that sometimes belief in yourself is all you have, and it's enough. Applause roared through the hall, but as I stepped off the stage, the sound faded, replaced by a voice I hadn't heard in years. Amelia? I turned, and my breath caught. It was Ethan. Older, sharper around the edges, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first office. "Didn't expect to see you here," I said, forcing a smile. He grinned. "Honestly, neither did I. Dad's been talking about you non-stop since that article. Said maybe he underestimated you." The words hit harder than they should have. "Did he?" I asked softly. Ethan shrugged. "He's complicated, but he wants to talk to you. Maybe fix things." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. For years, I'd imagined what that moment might feel like, hearing that he finally wanted to see me. Now that it was real, it felt unreal. "Tell him I'll think about it," I said. Ethan nodded, almost relieved. He'll be happy to hear that. As he walked away, I stood alone in the noise of the conference hall. Success all around me, but my heart somewhere back in that vineyard, waiting to see if healing could ever grow where pain once lived. I sat in my car outside the house I swore I'd never visit again. The iron gate looked smaller than I remembered, but the memories behind it still felt heavy. Every brick, every window whispered my old failures back to me, at least the ones they used to remind me of. It had been 6 years. 6 long years since the night I packed my things and drove away with nothing but a laptop and a suitcase. Now I was back. Not the same person, not the forgotten daughter, but still part of me trembled. I almost turned around twice before I finally opened the gate and drove in. The tyres crunched over gravel and the house came into full view. Dad's truck was in the driveway. Mum's garden was blooming, yellow daisies everywhere. For a second, I wondered if I was the intruder now. Ethan must have told them I was coming, because when I parked, the front door opened. Dad stood there. Same strong posture, same unreadable face. His hair was greyer though, and his shoulders drooped like time had caught up. "Amelia," he said, my name quiet, careful, like he was afraid it might disappear. "Hi, Dad." Silence. Just the sound of birds and the wind between us. Then Mum appeared behind him, her eyes already wet. She didn't say anything. She just stepped forward and hugged me. I froze. For years, I'd imagined this moment filled with anger, me demanding answers, shouting everything they made me feel. But now, all I could do was stand there as her arms trembled around me. When she finally pulled back, her hands were shaking. "You look so beautiful," she said, smiling through tears. "We saw you on TV, honey." Dad coughed softly. "Come in, Amelia. We should talk." The living room hadn't changed. The same brown leather couch, the same framed photos. But now there was one that caught my eye. Ethan's wedding photo in a silver frame, right beside an old one of me from high school graduation. It hadn't been there before. We sat in awkward silence until Dad finally spoke. "Ethan told me you've done well for yourself." I almost laughed. That's one way to put it. He nodded slowly. "I read that article too. $15 million. That's quite something." "It's not about the money," I said softly. "It never was." He looked down at his hands. "I know." The quiet that followed wasn't angry, it was heavy, like both of us were trying to find words that had been missing for years. Then, unexpectedly, he said, "I was wrong." My heart stopped. I thought being successful meant following one path: college, career, family. You didn't fit that. I thought it meant you failed. But you didn't. You built something incredible. The words I'd waited my whole life to hear felt unreal. "I just wanted you to be proud of me," I said, voice breaking. He looked up. I am. For the first time, I believed him. After dinner, I walked out to the porch. The sky was dark, filled with stars. Ethan joined me quietly. That went better than I thought, he said. I smiled faintly. Better than I ever imagined. He chuckled. You know, Dad's been talking about selling the old vineyard. He said it doesn't feel right anymore. Maybe he'll listen to your ideas for once. I looked out at the fields. My mind was already spinning, not with revenge, but with rebuilding. Maybe, I said, but only if things change for good this time. Ethan nodded. He knows that. We all do now. The night breeze brushed against my face, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the failure they left behind. I felt like the woman who came back. Not for approval, but for closure. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the old curtains in my childhood room. Everything was exactly as I left it. The faded posters, the chipped dresser, even the small note Mum once taped to my mirror. You'll find your way. Love always. I stared at it for a while. It felt strange, being in a space that remembered me when I wasn't even sure I remembered it. Downstairs, I heard voices. Dad and Ethan talking. I took a deep breath and followed the sound. They were at the kitchen table. Dad was holding a cup of coffee, eyes distant. When he saw me, he straightened. Morning, Amelia. Morning. He gestured toward the chair across from him. Sit down. There's something we'd like to discuss. My stomach tightened. Okay. He exchanged a glance with Ethan, then said, The vineyard's struggling. We can't keep it running the way we used to. Ethan's been helping with the finances, but it's hard. I blinked. I thought business was good. Dad sighed. It was, until we took that loan for Ethan's expansion project. It didn't pan out. Ethan's face darkened, but he didn't argue. Dad looked at me again. You've built something powerful, Amelia. You understand growth, strategy. I was wondering if you'd consider partnering with us, maybe using your platform to help the vineyard survive. The words hit like thunder. After years of being called the failure, now they wanted my help. I didn't know whether to feel angry or vindicated. I don't know, Dad, I said carefully. You made it clear once that I wasn't part of the family business. I know, he said quickly, and I was wrong. You don't have to forgive me overnight, but maybe we can start over as partners. The word partners hung in the air like a fragile bridge between two cliffs. I studied his face, the lines of pride, regret, and exhaustion. For once, there was no arrogance, just honesty. I'll think about it, I said. He nodded slowly, as if that alone gave him hope. Later that afternoon, I called Lydia. Guess who wants me to save the family business? I said dryly. She laughed. You're kidding. I wish. They're drowning in debt. Now suddenly I'm the daughter worth listening to. Her voice softened. And what do you want? I paused. That was the question, wasn't it? I want to help, I admitted. But not for them. For me. I want to close the wound without reopening it. That sounds like healing, she said gently. Not revenge. Maybe it's both, I murmured. That evening, Dad knocked on my door. He was holding an old photo. The three of us at the vineyard, me with dirt on my face, laughing. You used to love this place, he said quietly, before I made it something to fear. I looked at the photo, my younger self smiling without worry. She didn't know what was coming. He hesitated. Maybe she deserves to come back. I felt my throat tighten. If I do this, Dad, it's on my terms. Total transparency. No belittling, no comparisons. You treat me as an equal. not as someone you tolerate. He nodded, eyes glistening. You have my word. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then finally, I extended my hand. Then we have a deal. He took it, firm, steady, a father grasping for redemption. As I lay in bed later that night, I couldn't sleep. Something in me had shifted. This wasn't the revenge I imagined. It wasn't even about proving them wrong anymore. It was about rewriting how they saw me, how I saw myself. But deep down, I also knew one thing. If they ever broke that trust again, I wouldn't come back a second time. The next morning, I called a family meeting in the vineyard's old barn. Dust motes floated in the sunlight as I walked to the centre, past rows of wooden barrels. Ethan followed silently, still unsure how to act around me. Dad trailed behind, stiff, cautious. This isn't about the vineyard alone, I began, my voice calm but firm. It's about how we function as a family from now on. Mum's hands were folded nervously. Ethan avoided my gaze. Dad's eyes met mine, steady but wary. I took a deep breath. I'm willing to help the vineyard succeed, but there are conditions. Rules that must be followed if we're going to work together and if we're going to heal the family. Dad nodded slowly, and I could see he understood the gravity of my words. First, I said, there will be no belittling or comparisons. No one gets to say that another person isn't enough, or that someone is the failure of the family. That stops now. Ethan nodded slowly. Fair, he said softly. Second, I continued, all business decisions involving me will be made transparently. If I see mistakes, I will point them out. If I disagree, my voice will count as much as anyone else's. Dad's lips pressed together. He was listening, really listening. Third, I said, my eyes locking with his. Respect for my life outside this project. My time, my team, my priorities. None of it is up for debate. I am equal here, not subordinate. Mum swallowed. Amelia, she whispered. Yes, I said. I love you all. But love isn't enough. Boundaries are. Respect is. A long silence filled the barn. Dust floated between us like memories, old and stubborn. Finally, Dad spoke. I can do that. You can? I asked, raising an eyebrow. I can, he said slowly, emotion breaking through. I can follow these rules. I see now that I failed you in ways I didn't even understand before. You deserve equality, in business and in this family. Ethan looked at me, unsure whether to smile or cry. I agree too, he said, voice soft but genuine. I never realised how much I benefited from you being quiet. That ends now. Mum nodded slowly, tears filling her eyes. I'm sorry, Amelia, for everything I didn't see, everything I ignored. I felt a rush of relief, but I didn't smile just yet. This isn't about apologies, I said. It's about what happens from here. If you break these rules, there's no going back. Dad's voice shook slightly. I understand. You have my word, and I will not fail you again. I finally let a small smile escape. Not a grin, not victory, just a quiet acknowledgement that the hard work I'd done, the boundaries I'd set, were being honoured. That afternoon, we walked the vineyard together. I showed them how Link Logic could track inventory, manage deliveries, and boost profits. Dad asked questions, Ethan offered ideas, and Mum suggested improvements for the guest area. It was strange. This collaboration felt almost unreal after years of tension and silence. Later, when I left the barn, I paused at the doorway and looked back. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope. Not just for the vineyard, not just for the business, but for the family I'd almost given up on. And yet, a small voice inside reminded me I was still the one in charge. The rules were mine, and without them, none of this would work. I had forgiven, yes, but I hadn't forgotten. And that made all the difference. It started with whispers. I didn't expect the news to travel so fast, but apparently, in a small town, nothing stays secret for long. People began noticing the vineyard thriving in ways it never had before, deliveries running smoothly, profits increasing, and guests raving about the seamless management. And they all wanted to know who was behind it.
Dad was the first to feel it. One evening, I caught him pacing in the kitchen, muttering to himself while scanning his phone. His brows were knitted and his hands trembled slightly. "Amelia?" he called, almost shyly. "Yes?" I asked, leaning against the counter. He hesitated. "People are talking about you, about what you've built." I smiled faintly. "You mean Link Logic?" He nodded. "Yes, I think I finally understand. You weren't the failure we believed you were. You've built something bigger than all of us imagined. $15 million? And growing? How did I miss it?" The question hurt, not because he hadn't known, but because he had chosen not to see me all these years. Ethan came in next, holding a newspaper. "Dad, look at this," he said, his voice a mix of awe and guilt. The headline read, "Amelia Parker, Tech Innovator Revolutionising Small Businesses." The article went on to detail my rise, my company's achievements, and my vision for the future. There were pictures of me at conferences, speaking confidently, surrounded by my team. Dad leaned over the table, his eyes scanning every word. "All this? She did it herself?" he whispered. Ethan nodded slowly. "It's not just a company, Dad. It's proof. She never failed. We failed her." I stayed silent, letting the realisation settle in. They were finally seeing what I'd known all along, that their neglect, their comparisons, their constant dismissals had nothing to do with my abilities. That night, Mum approached me in the living room, her hands trembling. "Amelia," she said softly, "I didn't know. I thought you were struggling. I never realised how much you've achieved. I'm sorry for not seeing you sooner." Her voice cracked and I felt a familiar ache, the one I'd carried for years. But this time it was different. I didn't feel anger. I felt calm. "It's okay, Mum," I said. "I've done what I had to do. I've built my life. Now you're seeing it." Her eyes glistened. "I'm proud of you, truly." I nodded, not. Over the next few days, calls, messages, and even invitations from distant relatives poured in. Everyone wanted to congratulate me. Everyone, except the ones who mattered most, had finally begun to understand. I watched Dad, sitting quietly on the porch, the newspaper in hand, thinking about the years he spent underestimating me. I could see the weight of realisation on his shoulders. "You know," Ethan said beside me, "she's not just rich or successful, she's unstoppable. And we've been blind." I didn't answer. Instead, I looked out at the vineyard, the sun setting behind the hills. The fields were alive, thriving, just like I had.
For the first time, I understood something vital. Their apologies, their awe, their regret, they didn't matter as much as my own journey. I had survived the humiliation, built my empire, and set the rules. And now, finally, they had to face the truth. The truth that I was never the failure. They were the ones who had underestimated me. It happened sooner than I expected. Dad asked to meet me in the vineyard's main hall, the one I had spent weeks organising for Link Logic's integration. He looked nervous, uneasy, and for once, unsure of himself. "Amelia," he began, voice careful, "I want to talk about everything. About us. About me." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Go ahead." He sighed. "I've spent years thinking I was doing the right thing, comparing you to Ethan, pressuring you. I thought I was helping you, but I was wrong. I see that now. And I need to say I'm sorry." I studied his face. There was sincerity there, but also vulnerability. A side of my father I hadn't seen in decades. "I don't just want apologies, Dad," I said. "I want actions. I want to see that you understand what you did, that you'll never repeat it." He nodded slowly. "I understand. I've been blind. I didn't realise my words, my expectations, hurt you the way they did. You were always brilliant, but I couldn't see it." I let the silence stretch, letting him feel the weight of those years. Ethan stepped forward, shuffling his feet. "Amelia, I never realised how much you sacrificed for me. All the times you helped me with homework, my projects, even my money issues. I thought it was normal. But now I see it wasn't. You carried more than anyone should." His voice trembled, and for the first time he wasn't the golden child. He was the one who had benefited silently from my efforts. "I never asked for recognition," I said softly, "but I needed respect. Respect is what I've been missing." Mum hovered near the doorway, her hands wringing together. "I'm sorry too, Amelia. I should have seen. I should have defended you. I was too caught up in expectations and appearances." I nodded, acknowledging her remorse. But I didn't forgive lightly. Forgiveness had to come with change. "I'll work with you on the vineyard," I said finally, "but on my terms. Clear rules, transparency, and respect. Break them, and I walk away, permanently. This isn't about punishment, it's about boundaries. It's about fairness." Dad's eyes glistened. "You have my word. I'll follow your rules, Amelia. I see now how much I underestimated you. You're not just my daughter, you're my equal." Ethan looked at me uncertainly. I get it too. I don't want to be part of a system that makes you feel small. I promise to follow your lead." Mum nodded again, tears streaming. "We want to do this right, Amelia. Truly right." We spent the afternoon walking through the vineyard, discussing plans for integrating Link Logic into the farm's operations. I explained processes, offered strategies, and for the first time my voice carried authority, unchallenged. Every suggestion I made was accepted, every decision respected. The power dynamics had shifted, but not for control, for acknowledgement. They finally saw me, the real me, not the failure they had branded years ago. By evening, the sun was setting over the hills, painting the vineyard gold. We stood together in silence, and it felt different. Not perfect, but real. Honest. For the first time, I realised something essential. Confrontation wasn't about anger. It was about clarity, boundaries, and truth. I had faced them, not with hostility, but with certainty. And now, finally, the family that once dismissed me could see me as I always was: strong, capable, and undeniable. The confrontation wasn't the end of our story. It was the turning point. The first week of working together felt surreal. Dad, Ethan, and Mum all followed the rules I had set. No undermining, full transparency. Every suggestion and decision was open for discussion. It was different, respectful, productive. I started by introducing Link Logic into the vineyard's operations. From inventory tracking to delivery scheduling, every process was automated and organised. I walked Dad through the dashboards, showing him real-time updates and predictive analytics. He listened, genuinely impressed. "I never imagined this could be so efficient," he said. "It's not magic, Dad," I replied, smiling slightly. "It's structure, planning, and respecting the people who make it work, including me." Ethan was more hesitant. He often asked questions or offered ideas without considering the full picture. I corrected him politely, showing him how decisions impacted the business overall. "See," I said one afternoon, "if we schedule deliveries this way, the drivers save time and fuel. That's money back in the business. That's why transparency matters." He nodded slowly, finally understanding. "I get it now. It wasn't about your control. It was about seeing the full picture. I never saw it before." Mum, meanwhile, focused on customer experiences. She suggested small events at the vineyard to attract visitors. I implemented her ideas using Link Logic to manage guest reservations and staffing. When she saw how smoothly it ran, her eyes lit up. This is incredible, Amelia," she whispered. "I should have trusted you all along." We worked long hours together, often until sunset. There were small disagreements, naturally. Old habits die slowly. But each time I reminded them of the rules: respect, equality, transparency. And each time they corrected themselves, proving that they were learning, genuinely trying. By the end of the week, we had completed 3 major integrations: automated inventory, smart delivery tracking, and a guest management system. The vineyard ran smoother than it ever had before. Even Dad admitted, "I can't believe how much more efficient this place is. You've turned a struggling business into something thriving, and we owe it to your leadership." I let him take a small bow, but in my mind I knew the truth. The credit wasn't just in the systems. It was in the respect they finally gave me. That evening, I stood on the porch, watching the vineyard glow under the sunset. Ethan joined me quietly, a bottle of water in hand. "You know," he said, "I always assumed I was the one holding the family together. But you've shown us all what real strength looks like." I smiled faintly. It wasn't about proving strength to anyone. It was about setting the standards I deserved, about building something I could be proud of, and making sure no one could ever dismiss me again. Ethan nodded. "We get it now." Mum appeared behind him, carrying a tray of tea. "We're proud of you, Amelia. Truly. And we'll keep following your rules because we finally understand their importance." I sipped my tea, letting their words sink in. The vineyard wasn't just functioning better. It symbolised the shift in our family dynamics. Respect had replaced dismissiveness. Equality had replaced hierarchy. And yet, I knew this was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, we celebrated small victories. Customers praised the improvements. The vineyard's profits increased steadily. But the real triumph was the silent one. The family had finally learned to listen, to respect, and to value me as an equal. I had built an empire outside their walls. Now I was rebuilding it, and our family, from within. And for the first time in years, I realised something important. Success without respect meant nothing. But respect, hard-won and recognised, was everything. The integration wasn't just about systems or profits. It was about changing the foundation of our relationships. And finally, for the first time, it was airtight. It started like any normal morning at the vineyard. Birds singing, the sun rising over the hills, and the smell of fresh earth in the air. But by noon, the first crisis hit. A delivery truck carrying supplies for the vineyard had broken down, and a major client was waiting for a shipment. The previous owners would have panicked, shouted, or made last-minute mistakes. I stay calm. This was the moment to prove everything I had built, and to test whether my family would follow the rules. "Dad," I said, walking to him in the warehouse, "we need a reroute. The drivers must adjust, but the schedule has to stay intact. I've already mapped alternatives." He nodded, but I could see hesitation. Years of old habits die slowly. "Ethan," I added, "you handle client communication. Keep them updated and no improvising without me." He swallowed nervously, but complied. Mum stepped in to organise the warehouse staff, keeping the process smooth. It was remarkable. Every piece of the family working together without undermining one another. The hours that followed were tense. Trucks were rerouted, drivers communicated via the app. Ethan handled emails and calls professionally, following my instructions exactly. Dad monitored inventory and made notes, asking questions instead of assuming he knew better. The crisis became a live test. Not of link logic, but of the rules I had set. By evening, everything was resolved. The shipment reached the client on time. The warehouse was back on schedule, and even the drivers complimented the clarity of the system. I looked around at my family. For the first time, they were functioning not as separate individuals fighting hierarchy, but as a team following my lead, as equals, respecting my authority. Dad exhaled, leaning against a barrel. "I've never seen the vineyard run so smoothly. I see it now. Your way works, and we're finally listening." Ethan, still catching his breath from calls and logistics, smiled faintly. "I get it. I understand why we needed rules. We almost lost control by thinking we didn't need your guidance." Mum approached me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I'm proud, Amelia, not just for solving the crisis, but for teaching us how to respect and trust you." Later, alone in my office, I reflected on the day. Years ago, I would have been blamed for the truck breaking down, for anything that went wrong. My opinions would have been dismissed. I would have felt powerless. Now, I had authority, boundaries, and respect. Not because I demanded it with anger, but because I had earned it through consistency, knowledge, and unwavering rules. I realised something crucial. Success without respect might make others fear you, but success with respect ensures collaboration and loyalty. The vineyard had faced its first real test, and passed. But more importantly, my family had faced their first real test of trust and equality, and they had passed too. I allowed myself a small smile. This was more than just business. This was proof that the boundaries I had set were not only necessary, but effective. Tomorrow, the vineyard would operate under normal conditions. But today, I had seen the result of my leadership, and it was beautiful. I picked up my phone and sent a message to Lydia. First big test completed. They're learning. Slowly, but they are. Her reply came instantly. I knew they would. You've built more than a company, Amelia. You've built a family that finally sees you. I put the phone down and gazed out the window. For the first time, I didn't feel like the failure they had called me. I felt like the woman who had reclaimed her power and taught those who doubted her to respect it. This test had been only the beginning.
It was a quiet Saturday morning at the vineyard. The sun glinted off the barrels and the scent of ripe grapes filled the air. I was checking the delivery logs on my tablet when I heard Ethan's voice calling from outside. "Amelia, you need to come out here." I raised an eyebrow, setting the tablet down. His tone was frantic, the kind of panic he never displayed around me. "What's wrong?" I asked, walking toward the driveway. He pointed toward the road beyond the vineyard. My eyes widened. There it was, my property, the one I had quietly built over the past 2 years, spread out in the distance, sprawling and immaculate. The modern estate gleamed under the sun, landscaped gardens framing the structure like a painting. The driveway sparkled with luxury cars. From here, it looked almost unreal. Ethan's face went pale. "Dad, you need to see this," he shouted into his phone. I froze. That familiar thrill of quiet power surged through me. This was the life I had created in silence, the empire they never imagined. Within minutes, Dad arrived in his truck, eyes wide as he saw my estate. He parked, stepping out slowly, taking in every detail. I didn't know," he whispered, voice trembling. "You didn't know because I left," I said softly, crossing my arms. "Because no matter what I did, it was never enough for you. So I built my life, without permission, without approval, without anyone holding me back." Mum and Ethan arrived shortly after, their faces a mix of awe, disbelief and guilt. Ethan's voice shook. "All this? You did this on your own?" I nodded. "Every penny, every late night, every sacrifice you never noticed. While you spent money on weddings and comparisons, I built something real, something lasting." Dad's hand shook as he touched the wrought iron gate. "Amelia, I held up a hand, stopping him. "No excuses, no apologies. You had your chance to see me for who I am. You didn't. This is what I am now." The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. They were processing the scale of my achievement, the full measure of what they had ignored for years. Ethan finally whispered, "I can't believe it. I never realised how much we underestimated you." Mum's voice quivered. "All these years, we thought you were failing. And we were blind." I didn't say anything. I let them feel the weight of their mistake. Then, the unspoken truth hit home. Not only had I succeeded financially, but I had also created a life they couldn't control or diminish. For the first time, the balance of power had shifted entirely. They saw me as an equal now, maybe even superior in ways they could never replicate. Finally, Dad stepped closer, his eyes locking with mine. "Amelia, you've built something incredible. We were wrong, truly wrong. Can we ever make this right?" I studied him, measuring sincerity. "We can," I said slowly. "But there are rules. Respect, boundaries, transparency. You break them and everything, doesn't exist for you anymore. Do you understand?" He nodded solemnly. "I do. We do." A weight lifted from me. Not revenge, not anger, but clarity, recognition, respect finally earned, finally undeniable. Ethan looked at me awestruck. "I guess you really are unstoppable." I smiled faintly. "I am. And now you all get to see it for real." The revelation had been delivered.
And now, the real test of their transformation, of their willingness to truly change, was about to begin. The morning sun hit my property like a spotlight, illuminating every detail of the life I had quietly built. I stood at the balcony, looking down at the gardens, the driveway, the estate, all the proof that I had grown, thrived, and created something extraordinary without anyone's approval. And now my family was here to witness it. Dad, Mum, and Ethan stepped onto the property, still in awe. I could see the mixture of pride, guilt, and amazement on their faces. They were no longer just my parents and brother. They were witnesses to a truth they had ignored for years. "I can't believe this," Dad said softly. "All of this, Amelia. It's incredible." "It's what I built while being called a failure," I replied calmly, "while being told I'd never amount to anything." The words hung in the air, heavy but honest. I wasn't angry anymore. I was firm, grounded, and unapologetic. Mum's eyes filled with tears. We see it now. We're so sorry, Amelia." I nodded. Forgiveness wasn't blind. It wasn't immediate. It was conditional. The same conditions I had set before. Respect, transparency, equality. If they honoured them, the past could remain in the past. If not, the doors would close and they would remain outsiders in my life. I guided them through the estate, showing them the systems I had built, the operations I oversaw, and the life I had crafted. Dad asked questions, not to challenge me, but to learn. Ethan observed, silent at first, then impressed. Mum smiled, genuinely supportive as she understood the scale of what I had accomplished. "This isn't just a house," I said finally, "or a business. It's a symbol of boundaries and respect. The life I wanted, the life I was never allowed to have. I created it for myself. And now I'm letting you in, on my terms." They nodded, silently acknowledging that this was more than wealth or success. This was a message. Respect is non-negotiable, and my value is undeniable. Ethan, for the first time, looked at me without the arrogance of youth. "You know," he said slowly, "I don't think I ever realised how much strength it took to do all this, and how much we took from you by doubting you." I smiled faintly. "You see it now. That's enough." Dad stepped forward, shaking my hand with deliberate care. "Amelia, I've spent years underestimating you. I can't undo that, but I can promise you I will honour your rules, I will respect you, and I will never take you for granted again." I felt a weight lift from me, not the burden of revenge, but the relief of recognition and genuine accountability. By the afternoon, we were walking through the vineyard together. Decisions were made collectively, but my voice carried authority. Every action they took respected the rules I had established. The estate, the vineyard, the family. They were no longer separate arenas of control and resentment. They were unified under respect, trust, and transparency. I realised then that the ultimate victory wasn't in showing them my wealth or power. It was in teaching them to honour me. And they had learned. That evening, I sat on the balcony once more, watching my family work alongside me. Dad laughed quietly with Ethan over delivery logistics. Mum arranged guest schedules, impressed with the system I had implemented. I sipped my tea, content. Forgiveness had been earned, trust rebuilt, and respect established. I had proven to myself and to them that I wasn't a failure. And now, for the first time, we were a family that could move forward, stronger, wiser, and equal. I leaned back, feeling peace settle over me. Not triumph, not vengeance, just balance, clarity, and the quiet satisfaction of a life reclaimed. The story had reached its resolution. The past could no longer define me. The future was mine, and we would face it together.